So our reading room at the Williams Research Center has a full-time staff of 5 people plus myself. Of course, we all had to go to full work from home in mid-March of last year. Normally, our reading room is extremely walk-in friendly and in fact, walk-in encouraged. No appointments are necessary. We don't require any kind of letter of introduction or anything like that. And typically we do our reference interviews right there in person at the reference desk when the person walks in. So normally outside of COVID, 70 to 75% of research done using our collections is done on site by patrons in the reading room. So obviously we had to do a complete 180 on that last March when we closed. So we started distributing all of our patron queries by email and phone in a rotation around our 5 staff members. Plus, of course, I did some myself as well. And our staff used the online resources that we have at hand, plus our in-house resources to answer as many queries as we could. So we really relied on Ancestry.com, America's Historic Newspapers, JSTOR, of course, our own online catalog and digital assets database, and some other sources available through the public library or the consortium of the library consortium through the Louisiana State Library. So there are lots of resources out there. And then using these sources, we were able to fully answer probably about 40 to maybe 45% of the queries that we got. So that's using only like digitized sources through our own online catalog or other sources available, outside of HNFC's holdings. After about 2 months, I don't know, a month and a half or 2 months, we started to be able to access the buildings again, staff did. So at that time, that meant that we could really start to increase our scanning and copying to fulfill patron requests. So before COVID in the reading room, people would take their own photographs and we would do a very limited amount of scanning for offsite patrons. Like we might tell people we would do 25 or 30 pages or something like that. So we vastly increased that during COVID to where, last summer we started, we would do 100 letters out of a collection or a whole dissertation or full chapters of books, dozens of photos, all for reference purposes only, not for publication, reproduction, or anything like that. But so that was just really helpful to get people whatever it was that they needed when obviously they weren't able to come in. So by doing that, we were able to meet probably an additional 25% of queries, which is great. But for the rest, we just had to tell people, the people that need to do research on site that needed to really come in and view full collections to really synthesize the information and put everything together. We kind of just had to tell them that we get back to them or to, call us back in a couple months and we would hope the situation was better by then. We did reopen to researchers on June 24th of last summer under extremely reduced circumstances. In fact, we still are working under these same circumstances, which is that we're welcoming 2 patrons per day. We are requiring appointments as well as an extensive reference interview beforehand, including a pull list, or at least the beginning of a pull list. So we're acquainting people with our online catalog, either emailing them instructions or even going over how to access the online catalog with them over the phone or even on a Teams meeting or a Zoom or something like that to really help people because, as we all know, sometimes our online catalog resources can be a little bit opaque for people that aren't used to working with them. So we did open to 2 appointments per day. And we're also limiting our on-site reading room staff to 2 people per day. So even as of now, we're still only at, kind of 4 people in the reading room on any given day. Of course, this means that we are continuing to do the vast majority of our reference work remotely and continuing to do those high volumes of scanning for people. We're doing lots of genealogy and property research remotely for people, tracking down those newspaper, journal articles, so on and so forth, whatever it is that we can do offsite. We are hoping to expand our capacity in the reading room to 4 researchers per day pretty soon over the summer. We're finding that as our seasonal requests for research appointments always increases in the summer, and we are finding that to be the case this summer as well, when you have those academics or whoever who want to come spend their entire 5-week break spending every day in the reading room. So we're going to have to open up a little bit more in order to accommodate these summer researchers, which I'm very excited about. And it feels like time. It feels like we're at a place where we're safe enough and we know so much more about the science surrounding COVID that we're really going to definitely be able to safely do that this summer. In terms of takeaways, so I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that despite our best efforts, it's really difficult to keep any kind of accurate statistics about the amount of reference work that we've done during the breakdown. So as an example, in the last 5 years, we have averaged 1,479 unique check-ins in the reading room and a total of 3,123 hours, like research hours. And in the past year, March to March, we did 169 check-ins and 365 hours of research. So obviously that in no way accurately reflects the amount of research that our staff were doing for people. And we just never really figured out a great way to keep track of all of that data that wasn't too taxing for the reference staff and that made sense, in any kind of way to record it and keep it accessible. And then my second big takeaway is that it's really, really good that we've been expanding these reference interviews with people before they come in, because it turns out we're really able to do so much for people offsite, and that really opens up great opportunities for us to assist people who can't make it into our reading room. All right, so we're going to save any questions to later or to the end. And so right now I'm going to throw it over to my colleague, Amanda McFillin. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda McFillin. I'm the manager of programs and interpretive services here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. So our department is made up of programs, visitor services, and our education team. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the programs that we created during the pandemic to keep our audience engaged. So I'll just start a little bit before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, we had a really solid online presence. Our marketing team manages our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They also had established our blog, First Draft, that had been in place for a while. It was well established. Our website had some resources available, such as 4 virtual exhibitions, some lesson plans available for download, our online catalog, of course. But as far as programming goes in my department, we had done very, very little in the way of virtual programming. We had live streamed a couple of concerts. So this was a huge learning curve for us over the last year, like I suspect many of y'all as well. So when we closed to the public and we all came home, of course, that was another huge adjustment, was working from home and trying to find out how to collaborate and communicate with each other in this totally new way of doing things. The first thing we did to switch to creating online content and engaging with our audience online was to take stock of what we already had available on our website. So I mentioned the few resources of virtual exhibitions, lesson plans. We had some other things available to us as well. We had some of our content on YouTube. We had some of our oral histories had been digitized and put on our website. And so my colleague, Eli Haddow, who you're gonna hear from later, went through our website and just created an inventory of every resource that we could possibly offer to people that we already had in place. And so we created a page on our website called History from Home, and in a minute I'll drop the link into the chat. But this just brought all of those resources together in one location. And so right from their home page, if people went there, they could click on History from Home and be taken to all of these different resources. And that helped, obviously, our audience with pointing them in the right direction, but also bought us a little bit of time to kind of get our feet under us and really figure out what we wanted to do going forward with creating online content. So the next thing we did was we asked ourselves a couple of questions. We said, okay, what can we do easily with the staff that's available to work on this and with the resources that we have available to us right now. So what can we do that we already have the tools for? And then the second question is, what does our audience need right now? This is such a crazy time. You know, this was back in April, May. We were all in lockdown. People were under a lot of stress. And what does our audience need? So for the first question, what could we do easily? One thing that we did was we deputized our curators to work with our publications and our technology team to start creating virtual exhibitions out of past exhibitions that we already had all the content for. So we had already drafted all the text, we had the images digitized. And so we got them set up on inputting stuff into our virtual exhibition platform. And in about 4 months, went from 4 virtual exhibitions on our site to 14, including an exhibition that was curated from scratch that had not been an exhibition before, and that was on the history of the suffrage movement in New Orleans. That was a wonderful exhibition. So that was something that we could get started with pretty quickly. And then the second thing to ask, what is our audience looking for? Well, we asked them on social media, but we also asked our own staff because they were in a very similar position, of course, as well. And we got a great list of things from our staff, some really wonderful ideas about things that we could do that fulfilled our mission of providing, you know, educational content about the history of New Orleans, but also were just a little bit lighter, which is what people needed during this time. So one thing we did was we created these wonderful virtual wallpapers that you see behind me. I see Kent has one up as well. Yes, thank you, Kent. So those are available on our website for people to download and have maybe a little bit more fun during their Zoom meetings. We created a program called NOLA Movie Night that's still going on, where about once a month, we jump on Twitter with everybody and we watch an iconic New Orleans film together, and we tweet out historical content about that film. We started a bracket competition that's run a few times now, where we asked our public to vote on their favorite New Orleans song or New Orleans film or the beloved local landmark. We produced family activity kits that we delivered around the city. We created a portrait challenge and challenged the public to recreate one of our portraits. And I want to say also during this time, not only did we reach out to staff, but we reached out to the museum community around the country and especially here locally. And so thank you all for sharing your ideas, your insights, and just offering support. It was a really wonderful time, and I was so proud of our community for really coming together and supporting each other. So the next thing we did, of course, after we kind of got some of these initiatives rolling, was to learn how to use Zoom, like everyone else. And so by June of last year, we were hosting lectures and panel discussions and book clubs over Zoom. Our education team hosted dozens of virtual field trips in this past year. And over the next few months, as we got better at Zoom and as we figured out how to take an in-person event and translate it into a virtual event, because as we all know, it's not a one-for-one. But as we got better at that, we were actually able to bring back some of our kind of signature annual conferences. So our food forum, we were able to host that last November, and our history symposium we hosted in March. And that was really important for us. These are kind of signature events that people come to year after year. So to be able to provide that sense of community and that sense of connection and normalcy, even if it's in a virtual environment, it was something we really wanted to do. And so that was a little bit of a challenge to see how to take what made those things special and bring them into a virtual space and retain that sense of, like I said, connection and community. I'm running out of time here, so I just want to say like a few lessons. Before the pandemic, I always thought about how do we bring people to the French Quarter? How do we bring them to our museum? But my idea of that has totally changed, of course. Now, what I think about is how do we get what we're doing out to wherever our audience is, wherever they are. That might be around the country. Sometimes it's around the world, which is so exciting to see people tuning in from outside the country. We're also regularly posting our recordings of our presentations on YouTube. So instead of just having a one-off event and moving on, now people can enjoy it going forward. We're offering closed captioning, and we're beginning to offer live Spanish translation. So just trying to make our programs accessible more and more as we go along. And I'll just say this, it's been a year of experimentation, of being flexible and being really creative. And going forward, we are going to transition back to in-person programs, but we're going to be experimenting with live streaming and figuring out what that looks like, because that's different from doing just a virtual conference. So that's going to be a new era of experimentation and being flexible and refining what we do. So thank y'all so much. If you have any questions, like I said, I am up for sharing because the museum community has been so supportive. So please reach out. And at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Mark Cave.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Cave. I'm the oral historian with HNOC, and I've been here a long time. And we have had an active oral history program since Katrina. So we've done a number of crisis oral history projects, one in the aftermath of Katrina and another in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So it was something that we had a familiarity with. So when COVID hit, I was asked to create an oral history response to the pandemic. And so we created From the Frontline narratives of the COVID-19 pandemic in New Orleans. And it focuses on frontline workers, but that can mean many different things. Of course, a restaurant worker is a frontline worker, an artist is a frontline worker as well. And so it has a pretty big scope. We started it in, I guess, June is when we first started doing interviews. I had COVID beginning in late March. And so my wife and I were really sick the first, couple months, and we thought we were gonna die. It was horrible. And so I couldn't watch the news or anything like that. It was just too scary. And so when I started to organize the project, I reached out to first responders and other people who were involved in the response just to get a sense of what the community had been through for those 2 months that I had tuned out from everything. And so we created an advisory board made up of different people that could help us target interviewees. And so had somebody from the mayor's office, heads of different hospitals that helped us start the project at the beginning. I was a little uncomfortable at first in doing interviews. It was such an awkward situation to do an in-person oral history. So I started with the New Orleans Health Department, and they kind of set me up on the procedures to do a safe in-person interview at that time. So that was the first hurdle, is actually getting over this awkwardness of doing an interview. But it ended up being a really good thing. The first responders, they were going to work every day. They were comfortable in these social situations. And when we started in June and July, they were just so anxious to share what they had been through. It was such a traumatic experience for hospital workers, for healthcare workers, that they needed to tell somebody about it. And so it was really interesting. We did a great series of interviews with the New Orleans VA hospital, which was the place where they had the first diagnosed case in the city. And they revamped most of their hospital to create rooms where they can isolate patients for COVID. So it was a massive undertaking to do that. So we documented that. We interviewed Mayor Cantrell early on, who's the mayor of New Orleans, and that opened up a lot of doors for us. We got the sense that politicians are normally very guarded in what they would say, but during this time, I got the impression that they just didn't care if they got reelected. It was such a horrible time for them that they just spilled out everything. And so we got a lot of really good content. So far, we've gathered about 50 hours of audio recording. And we also followed up on that with videos. So we hired a videographer to film selected interviewees that, were really comfortable in front of the camera. And we produced 9 short films, which are featured on our website, to give people a sense of what it was like for first responders. And those have been shared on our social media platforms throughout this time. We've also created a website, which you can get to through hnoc.org. And we've done a series of radio features on WWNO, which is the NPR affiliate here. And they're 3 to 5 minute audio features that are devoted to different interviewees that we did. So It's an ongoing project. I think we plan to do about 100 to 150 hours of taped interviews. Right now, we're kind of transitioning from the frontline workers and the initial response to the ongoing recovery, bringing back our tourist economy, the impact to traditions like Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest and these other longstanding traditions in the community. So that's my little spiel. I'd like to turn it over to Amy Everett.
Hi, I'm Amy Everett. I am the curator of manuscripts here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. And so I have responsibility for most manuscript acquisitions, as well as preservation and conservation of our manuscript holdings. Going into this event, it was my responsibility to document it. And so I was able to utilize our subscription to our web archiving service, Archivit, to begin building a collection right before we shut down. Once we did shut down, I was able to continue adding to that, preserving the mayor's Twitter feed and Facebook page and things like that. I focused on documenting groups that responded to food insecurity. I was also focused on building a physical collection, which was difficult when we were shut down. I worked with our marketing department, who developed a hashtag, hashtag COVIDNOLA, where people would tag their posts and we could gather them that way. One of the first things I did on the day we shut down, as I was walking to the parking lot, I was able to pull a broadside off of a wall that had been posted in the quarter about an upcoming radio broadcast by a workers' rights group. I brought that back, got fussed at a little bit, but I was able to continue building that. I did several press interviews, and our collecting project was pretty well publicized. So we got some wonderful material documenting the event, things like the jazz festing in place, which occurred, where people celebrated in their living rooms and on their front porches rather than at the festival grounds. I also was focused on maintaining our relationships with donors and dealers, some of whom had sent us things before the shutdown and were expecting payment that we weren't able to make at that time. Fortunately, they were all pretty understanding. One of my concerns was that, unlike Mark, who was able to shut everything out, my focus was on documenting the event day by day by day, and I could not shut out everything that was going on around me. So I know, like other people, I took up pandemic baking. So I will turn it over to Sarah Duggan.
Hello, thanks, Amy. Hi, I'm Sarah Duggan. I am the coordinator and research curator of the Decorative Arts of the Gulf South Research Project here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. So I'm part of our curatorial and collections division, and I work very closely with Lydia Blackmore, who's our curator of decorative arts. So I'm in charge of a research project that involves a lot of travel every summer. We offer 2 fellowships every year to current graduate students or emerging professionals in the field, and they travel with me basically the whole month of July. The project is dedicated to cataloging historic objects made or used in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama prior to 1865. So it's a very broad scope. I'm looking beyond just New Orleans. And when lockdown started, I had literally just selected my 2 fellows for summer 2020. And they're some of the most qualified fellows we ever had. We were so excited to get them on board. And then I had to tell them, and I wasn't sure, what would things be like in the summer. So I had to kind of wait. And then once we got to May, we made the executive decision that we're just going to cancel field day this year. Because what we're doing is have like a mobile photography studio, and we go into private homes and small museums. And this is definitely not the time to be visiting nice old ladies in the South and breathing on their furniture while we examine it and photograph it. So it was a tough decision, but it was the right one, and travel, was getting increasingly complicated. So with my summer off, I spent a lot of time comparing previous state data from previous years to get uploaded to our online database with the help of Kent, who we'll be speaking to in a minute. We also worked on rebranding the project, which was something I had in the works or was hoping to do for a while. And this gave us some space to really think about how we want to continue to grow the project in the future. So previously it was known as the Classical Institute of the South, which was a little bit of a confusing name because we're not just looking at classical things. We're not looking at the entire South. So we were able to talk to our stakeholders and through a lot of open communication, settle on the new Decorative Arts of the Gulf South name, or DAGs. And I also contributed to some of the online content Amanda was talking about. I wrote some blog posts. I joined the committee for our NOLA Movie Nights events on Twitter. So we would prepare tweets in advance, and I was able to reference some things from my database, permanent collection. I also helped we do an antiques forum every August, which is a great event, lots of fun. And of course, that was not possible either. So we were able to digitize some previous talks and put them on YouTube, which we've never done before. So I helped with the selection of those, and that had a great response from our audience and our members. And then my largest pandemic project is Lydia Blackmore and I curated an exhibit, which just opened. So Pieces of History, 10 Years of Decorative Arts Fieldwork is celebrating the 10th anniversary of the DAGS project and helping to present some of the information we've gathered, put it in historical context. It involves a lot of photo reproductions from the database, as well as some objects on loan from homeowners where we cataloged previously around the region. So that was a lot of what our remote work entailed. We had to pivot a lot once we realized the restrictions we were working under. Initially, I had planned this really fun touchscreen interactive map that people could engage with in the gallery. We also wanted to have just a computer monitor station where people could browse the database when they were done looking at the exhibit. And of course, all of those tactile things had to get eliminated once COVID started. So we had to think of what we could do instead of those. We were now, instead of a computer terminal, we have just a little sign with a QR code people can scan to look at the database on their phones. And through this, I discovered our database is very mobile friendly. So that was a happy discovery. The interactive, sadly, never came to be, but maybe one day be a website feature once we get the exhibit content online. So we had to get creative, but honestly, planning everything remotely with all of us working from home, all of our new Microsoft Teams file sharing actually made the planning a little bit easier. We were always sharing files and photographs with our colleagues in other departments because we're working with our prep team, our graphic designers, our photographers, our editors. There's a lot of text in the show. One thing that worked really well is one of our members of our prep team is very well versed in Google SketchUp, and he has a scale model of the gallery we were working with. And he was able to, he could share his screen in a video call, and then he could walk us through the scale model and then reposition the different, text panels and image panels. And that was actually a great way to visualize what we were working with. And we all agreed it was a lot easier to do it over screen sharing than if all of us were clustered around a computer together in some of these physical offices. And being able to say, oh, I thought of something else we should include and put it into the chat in the video call. So that ended up being a very positive experience. And it was a really great collaboration. And I'm grateful that that gallery is open. It's one of our larger galleries. So it's one of the first that we reopened. There's more space for social distancing. That's something else we took into account when we were planning out placement of text panels. We don't want people to be crowded into corners and things like that. So being able to see it physically come to fruition is really wonderful. We're not able to do a big opening reception, which we hope to do, but we might do a smaller one later this year. And I'm happy to say that we are doing fieldwork this summer. My two fellows that I had selected last year are able to fill their fellowships this year instead, which is fantastic because I once it started to seem like felt like it was possible, I wasn't going to have time to do a lot of recruiting at the last minute to find someone who's willing to come to New Orleans at the last minute. So yeah, so we'll be proceeding with some caution, kind of going with what local COVID restrictions are. But now that vaccinations are available, it's a huge relief that, you know, my fellows and I won't have to like distance from each other when we do. So it's been an opportunity to be creative and find some new solutions. So I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Kent Winowski.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Kent Winowski, the Digital Assets Manager in our Technology Department at the time of the shutdown. Now I'm Head of Digital Initiatives at the collection. I want to start by going through what we in the Technology Department had to do to our infrastructure to get our staff working remotely, and then what we did to push our collections and exhibits online. Like most everybody else, our infrastructure was geared on people working in the office. We pushed out Office 365 and SharePoint in about 4 days, right before the shutdown. We've been looking into rolling it over the course of the year, but the pandemic greatly accelerated that timeline. We had Microsoft Teams, which is our internal communication program, running by the end of March. And everyone's email was migrated from our in-house Exchange server to the cloud in April. So we got up and running pretty quickly. When I asked our network manager, who was in charge of all this, about the whole process, she said it was super fast and messy, and then used several words of very elegant profanity to describe the process. I was only tangentially involved in all of that part. As the digital assets manager, I was charged with making sure staff had access to our digitized holdings. Digital items were going to be the only way that we were going to be able to keep working. Unfortunately, our digital items and the DAMS, the Digital Asset Management System, lived on a local server, and we couldn't open it up to public web traffic. It was just too risky for our born digital holdings and our master files to expose them to a possible attack on the web. I met several times with our vendor Piction, and we just couldn't figure out a cost-effective and timely way to get 120 terabytes of materials accessible in the cloud. We had to rely on VPN access for the staff that needed it most, and those staff would have to help out the ones that didn't have a collection laptop. We scavenged every possible laptop from the campus and distributed them as best we could, and it was not enough, as I'm sure my colleagues will tell you. Once the dust kind of settled a bit, as Amanda mentioned, we wanted to get our collections and especially our exhibits online. Our catalog was in great shape in terms of digitized items. We have a fantastic photography department that really cranks out a lot of digitized materials. It's hard to get an exact figure of just how much we have digitized, like in a percentage wise of the collection. Our manuscript collections are not described to the item level all the time, but we do have 300,000 digitized images and more multimedia files. 99% of those that can be attached to a catalog record are attached to a catalog record, and the vast majority are accessible to the public. We have a very liberal interpretation of fair use, and we try and get as much out to the public as possible through our catalog. In terms of exhibits, I had been pushing for online exhibits for many years with limited success. There were concerns that a virtual exhibit would detract from getting people in the door to see the in-gallery exhibit. We didn't have enough staff. Curators didn't have enough time to develop an online exhibit while they were planning an in-gallery exhibit. It just wasn't part of our workflows. I experimented with Omeka a little bit and found it kind of lacking and hard to use. Amanda mentioned we did have an in-house system. It was created in Drupal by our programmer. We were lucky to have an in-house programmer that could put together these things, but I can't say we had a robust presence online in terms of exhibition. Catalog, great. Exhibitions, not so much. In a fortuitous turn of events, we had just met with a representative from Google Arts and Culture about a month before we shut down. And we started the discussions about signing up with them. If you're not familiar with the program, Google has this program called Google Arts and Culture that they will host online collections, online exhibits, give you tools to building virtual exhibits. They will lend out high resolution scanners and cameras. They'll send teams out to photograph your materials. They'll send cameras in to do street view style filming of your public spaces, and it's all for free. We were intrigued before the pandemic, and our administration became very much more intrigued after the shutdown. So we signed the contract, and I spent a good portion of my time selecting and uploading objects to their system, which is very user-friendly, pretty easy to use, and got to work building our first exhibit, French Quarter Life, which is based on an exhibit that went up right before we shut down. I think it actually went up while it had not opened when we shut down. So it was on the walls, but not accessible to the public. I'm going to put a link to our portal page at Google Arts and Culture here in the chat so you can see it. This is our first exhibit, French Quarter Life. And here was our first exhibition built on our in-house system. I want you to kind of see the difference between the two systems. We're a history museum, and Google is geared towards art museums. So you can really see the difference. Google is very much focused on images over text, and our system really kind of mimics the gallery experience with large text panels and interpretive content. We were able to meld the two ideas with our first completely born digital exhibit, actually first and only completely born digital exhibit that Amanda mentioned, Yet She Is Advancing. That is this one here. And you can see we've got documents, we've got photographs, we have audio recordings, all kind of put together in a very slick style that Google allows us to use that we wouldn't be able to do on our in-house system. We've got 6 exhibits up in Google Arts and Culture, 546 items. There are 9 in our in-house system now, so that's 15 total. We really worked to get these things online as quickly as we could. They're getting a fair amount of hits, but we're still in the process of figuring out how to best analyze the data beyond just page views. There's so much more that we can learn from our users that we haven't quite figured out how to do yet. I know people have all sorts of opinions about the pervasiveness of Google in our lives. I have my own concerns, but they were absolutely wonderful to work with. The comparison between what we were able to do on our homegrown system and what the Google system could do is just, it's astounding, the difference. The exposure we get from being part of their arts and culture ecosystem is great too. You have a Chromecast TV, you can sign up to get automatic images from around their entire collection of collections, and our stuff could show up in there. I'm still waiting to see one of our things show up. I haven't seen it yet. New Orleans has such an international interest, and Google gives people in faraway places easier access to our collections than just through our online catalogs. So for all the difficulties this past year has kind of put upon us, the bright spot is that, like Amanda mentioned before, we are dedicated to getting these materials online. We're reinterpreting our users to not just be those physical users in the building, but our users are everywhere in the world, and we want to bring our content to them. We recently created a new department to centralize the creation of these digital content projects. We don't have any plans to scale back our online exhibits. We're starting to include a virtual exhibit, or at the very least an online component, into every in-gallery exhibit. So it's really been great to see our access grow just beyond people who have to come to the French Quarter to see us. And now I'm going to pass it to Jen Gabriel.
Thanks, Kent. My name is Jen Gabriel, and I am the collections manager at the Historic New Orleans Collection. But I also oversee the registration department. And so today I'm going to talk about our acquisitions process during the last year due to COVID. When it was first announced that we were closing our institution due to the pandemic on March 16th, our first goals in our registration department were to identify material and collections that were on deposit and not yet approved by our board of directors. We sought to contact all donors and vendors who had material with us and notify them that we were closed indefinitely. And that included a delay in approving these acquisitions. So they were all informed of that. Then in about June of 2020, we began the process of reopening our buildings to a limited number of staff, and we opened our outdoor spaces to the public. And it became quickly apparent that we needed to develop a set of guidelines for material coming in and out of the collection. And so we established a set of guidelines, and we also established a specific quarantine document that one of my colleagues made up that we placed with the material coming in and assigned to a designated location. At the time, we did not know enough about the virus transmission, and so we're quarantining all mail and all items that came in to the collection. We now know that that's not necessary, but out of an abundance of cautions, that is what we were doing. So I'll go over a couple of the guidelines we established. All incoming and outgoing collections must be coordinated through the registration office with advance notice. This includes potential acquisitions, collections material going to or from conservation, and incoming and outgoing loans. We requested that donors be encouraged to mail in all acquisitions. We found that a lot of people went through material in their houses while they were shut down. So there was a lot of interest in donating. All gifts being considered for acquisition. When we did resume our acquisition meetings with the board, since they were all virtual, we needed to have a photograph of everything to show to the board of directors. And so we requested that happen from the curators. Unsolicited gifts, we received some of those and by mail, and they were quarantined in the same manner as all our mail. Further quarantine measures were taken once the package was opened after a 24-hour period. Incoming acquisitions that were approved once we resumed our acquisition meetings were quarantined in a designated space or at our offsite storage. And we determined that based on the size and extent of the acquisition. Additionally, incoming loans and items returning from conservation, once we resumed picking up items that had been out on conservation, were also quarantined. And pickups that we did through our staff vehicle were limited to 2 people or to a third-party shipper. So that was really great. And then as the summer progressed and we began to open even more spaces, including the reading room by appointment only and our main exhibit galleries, we saw more people coming on site. And so we had to add a few things to the guidelines to include statements on meeting with donors or vendors face-to-face. And we determined that material pickups, returns, and drop-offs would adhere to a schedule. We only accepted them on Tuesdays or Thursdays by appointment, and we would only make runs with our staff vehicle on Wednesdays. We insisted that donors make an appointment in advance and were based on space and social distancing restrictions, and masks were required. Any walk-ins were continued to be encouraged to be directed to the Office of Registration. And then we also still did appraisals or made ourselves available to appraisers based off appointments, but encouraged them to be electronic based. So yeah, that was really a crazy time. Today, we are in the process of reevaluating these guidelines even further due to the new CDC announcement. And part of this will include the removal of the quarantine process. However, many of the guidelines we developed will stay in place indefinitely. We felt that the designation of times for conducting pickups and designating locations for material to be dropped off was beneficial to not only our department, but also our preparation department. And I like to believe that it gave the curators some guidance, especially with their discussions with vendors and donors. In conclusion, the ability to be flexible and constantly able to adapt to the changing situation was important to managing a very aggressive acquisition program that we have at the collection. We learned a lot of lessons, but in some ways I feel that we are better prepared and set up to bring in collections when we aren't in a pandemic anymore. And one other takeaway that I noticed was that there was an increase in digital donations, and that's led us to work on an online submission platform, and it's being developed for use on our website. So thanks so much, and I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Joe Shores.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Shores. I'm the head of the preparations team here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. And the pandemic, as you can guess from a standpoint of handling art, posed a lot of challenges to the team because we have to work together and oftentimes very close to each other in order to lift heavy objects face to face. Also, Microsoft hasn't developed a virtual table saw yet, and we're looking forward to when they do so that we can work from home. But our first priority was to facilitate the opening of our outdoor spaces. I came from the curatorial staff to try to give people who are still on the streets in New Orleans a space to encounter our exhibition spaces and learn about our programming and collecting and publishing. And so we worked with the publications department and our in-house graphic designer to build the didactic panel exhibition that was placed in all three of our courtyards that were open to the public, where we required masks on site for everybody. But our visitor services team also engaged with the public there to kind of keep our mission fresh in people's minds as our structures were closed. After that point, we went into we have a fairly aggressive changing exhibition program. We're turning out big gallery exhibitions in our new spaces about every 3 months. And over the course of the pandemic, March 15th, we completed the striking of an exhibition. We were gearing up for the installation of the next major exhibition. And then we all went home for 3 weeks while we tried to figure out if we could come back on site safely. And after that point, we devised a way to create separated spaces for preparators to work and assigned everybody a tool cart and encouraged the enforcement of don't touch the purple painted tools because those belong to ex-preparator. You have your own cart. But now that we know that the transmission doesn't work from surface to surface as great, we've gone back to stealing each other's tools. But that led us to also examine how we were preparing our exhibitions and what spaces we were using to prepare those exhibitions. So we spread out to our offsite storage facility and created a full-on matting and framing facility out there. So we started splitting the team up to try to create as much social distance as absolutely possible before going into a phase in which we had to stand next to each other to hang objects on the wall. And at that point, it dawned on us that we all needed to just be very open and honest with each other about what our lives outside of the job looked like. So we became a COVID pod family. So we, there was no, strict enforcement of this, but we all found a responsibility to tell each other about, and of course, all this happens over the holidays. Some people needed to travel for various reasons. And so we created ways for, and as the head of the team, I started stockpiling work that could be completed from home, administrative things such as our board reporting, so that people could have a space to work from home for a few days to quarantine. But yeah, that's an overview of how we lived in the COVID era. As been mentioned before, our SketchUp team, we've been using SketchUp here for the last 8 years and to great success. But one of the things that we're going to carry forward from this is, I think, the virtual meeting at which everybody doesn't have to crowd around a single computer monitor or a projector in our office space. It also allows more people to attend the meeting to see the information that's being developed, which creates better outcomes for exhibition design problems that sometimes even we don't see leading up to the installation of a show. So we're catching those things earlier. We're also happy to have more space to work in giving each other kind of more room than having to work on top of each other in small workshops. So that's something we're going to hold on to as well. Yeah, and that's about it for me. I think I turn this over to Lori.
Thank you, Joe. Just to do a check-in with the audience, I am the penultimate speaker or presenter, so just to keep you on your, I guess, on the schedule. I am Lori Boyer, the head of visitor services here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. Our department has a dual role. Here at the collection, we deal with logistics like ticketing and wayfinding and greeting visitors, and then we also provide interpretation. So our model is to provide face-to-face interaction. We have staff in the galleries who do engagement with visitors face-to-face, talking with them, sharing content information, and we also research, create, and provide interpretation programs like guided tours and activity sheets, family guides, those kinds of things. We're not doing any kind of online engagement in our department pre-pandemic. Then the March closure comes. We really just started scrambling. I have a large staff. At the time of closure, it was about 26 people. Our job is interacting with people, so we didn't really translate well to work from home. So we kind of scrambled and made it up week to week. We weren't really aware of how long we would be closed to the public. At the beginning, it's kind of, we thought maybe the summertime we'd be reopened, and we ultimately did, but in variously different ways than we were expecting. So we decided to take the opportunity to train a lot. We went a lot more in depth on exhibitions that were going to be opening. When we did eventually reopen the buildings, and also these training sessions, they turned into these communication meetings for us where we could check in with each other and catch up on institution news. It became some team building exercises. It was sort of a dual aspect for us. We also worked on learning more about interpretation techniques, which is something that is we're trying to grow a little more formally in our department. We also had to look at how are we creating our interpretation programs, because we needed to meet the audience where they were at now or then. So while we were closed, we worked on translating tours to an online experience. We did some videos, and then we started creating backups of projects that we could do so that when we did reopen, how we could provide that face-to-face engagement, but still do so safely, because we didn't want to lose that object of engagement. We didn't want to lose that face-to-face feeling that we get with our visitors, but we were very concerned about safety aspects. So we came up with some ideas of translating. Some of the easy concepts would be translating to create audio guides where visitors could have their own self-guided experience, but not lose the engagement aspect. And then things that we haven't quite introduced yet would be things like a history mystery in the galleries, or adding dialogic questions to our exhibition labels. So we did reopen in June. We started with an outdoor reopening, and then we reopened our buildings and museum and exhibition spaces in September. And we did all the safety things that I'm sure y'all have experienced too, like adding plexiglass and hand sanitizer stations, social distance markers. We changed the flow of our visitors so that we can manage the movement in our buildings. We changed our entrances. We lowered the capacity of people that we would allow onto the campus at any time. We created timed entrances and timed ticketing. And a lot of this was by city mandate. So we were doing it to follow safety practices, but also keeping in line with what our city was mandating. In our department, we have to consider the human element. So how to make the public feel safe after lockdown, when the world was sort of reopening, we thought people would want to be interested in community. That became a key word for us. How do we provide community for the public and also make it safe? And not just safe for our visitors, but safe for our staff. How do we transition to working in a pandemic environment with the public that's going to be coming on site and making sure that we're addressing staff safety concerns? So we did a lot of training on how to manage a public in a pandemic. How to talk to someone about, hey, your mask is slipping down your nose, or how to manage the new visitor flow. And then with all the social change and the racial reckoning that was happening in the United States at the time, we had conversations about how to engage with visitors and the things that were going to be on their mind when they were coming back into the museum, and also how to disengage from conversations that were just not working for us. We did create a mobile visitor guide. We tried to, this was, based on the information that we understood at the time, we tried to get rid of all of our paper stuff. So instead of tickets and scanners, we used stickers and clickers, so we could limit the interaction that we were having with the public, but still be able to provide socialized engagement. Social distance engagement, I'm sorry. So we are not fully reopened. We're going to open again more spaces in stages. We have adapted to the changes. So we're bringing back more paper items, and we've raised our capacities, although we're not meeting our capacity limits. We are probably getting about 15% of our visitorship from 2019 that's coming in on site. We're working on ways to reach our visitorship online, but we're doing that a lot with other departments. So what are some of the lessons that we learned? In our department, we cannot over communicate with each other. Working in a pandemic, there are a lot of emotional roller coasters, and the more information that we could share back and forth, from management to staff, from staff to management, up to admin, we found that was actually working better for us, and set out the expectations better, and then work together to figure out how we could make these challenges, turn them into opportunities. Something that I have really enjoyed, and maybe hope my colleagues do too, is the teamwork that we developed within our organization, because we were very reliant on online and digital aspects that a lot of us didn't have skills for. So we had to reach out and work with other departments, and I think that created a heck of a lot more meetings than we were used to. But it also did create, and I think Sarah was talking about this, the opportunity to be able to engage safely, but also engage more deeply. So that's something we want to definitely maintain. And in our own department, we looked at a lot of the inefficiencies. They kind of started to come to life of just how we were scheduling each other, and how we can make that work a little better. And of course, we want to maintain this hybrid system of interacting with our visitors digitally as well as face-to-face engagement. So we're hoping that maintains. And now I will pass it on to Eli. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. My name is Eli Haddow. I am the marketing associate at the Historic New Orleans Collection, which doesn't really say anything, but most of what I do is handle our social media and digital media via our First Draft blog, which we started back in 2018. And I'm posting a link to First Draft now, so there's some reference as to what I talk about for most of this. Really what I do, and what I like to think I do at least, is take our staff knowledge and interpretive expertise and transfer it to the online user or visitor in the most readily accessible way. So often that's through a Facebook post or an Instagram post, tweet, or a First Draft blog. Sometimes it's through a virtual exhibition, and we'll talk about some of the new ways that we engage visitors as well. So as Amanda said earlier, we had a, not an institution-wide comprehensive digital strategy before the pandemic, but we had published first drafts since 2018, and we'd had at least 3 social media accounts since 2017. So our approach was really to focus mostly on the mission and to tell stories that, arose whether from exhibitions or from staff knowledge about the history of the region. As I think Kent said, there is an international appeal to New Orleans history, and we were finding that out well before March of 2020 through traffic to our first draft blog, specifically from states and countries all over the world. So, when I was leaving the office on March 13th, 2020, I wrote down 3 or 4 different pages on our website where I had changed information related to the pandemic, which is comic now because I think almost every page of our website has changed since the pandemic started. And the first thing we really did in that next week, besides panic, was try and continue what we were already doing. So we'd planned a 6-month series on first draft on women's history. And I believe that Friday, the 20th, we published the first story in that series as scheduled, which was kind of, at least in our marketing brains, us planting the flag that the Historic New Orleans collection would remain open for business and stay relevant. And then our content quickly shifted with the times. As Amy mentioned, we collaborated with her to create the hashtag NOLA Corona in order to give people the opportunity to use that tag, and have their post enter our permanent holdings through our Born Digital social media archiving service. We published a story on that, and that included an interview of Amy, which generated some local and national media interest, which she touched on. So Amy was able to get the word out on that and help with our early collecting in COVID-19. We published a 25 to 30-year-old story from our quarterly magazine that a retired senior curator had written about the Spanish flu in New Orleans. We brought that and we put it online on our first draft blog and got about 20,000 hits in the first couple of days. So we knew that people were kind of thirsting for context in this moment of panic and confusion. And we were just able to provide some of that. And that story actually informed some of Mayor LaToya Cantrell's State of the City speech, I was later told by one of her aides. And one of our editors had an experience with COVID that brought him to the hospital, and he wrote his own kind of chronicle of that experience for the first draft blog. So these were some kind of topical posts and pieces of content that we were able to roll out as things were very much fluid and unfolding in that March and April time. And, being a social media manager and on the platforms constantly throughout the day during those months was, well, they're not really any good words to describe what that was like, but it was not my favorite part of the job, but it really paid off in keeping us relevant. And what I'll talk about is how we've kind of gained and maintained a strong base of support since we closed our physical doors. Since March 13th of 2020, we've increased web traffic by 85%. In the period before, we had 276,000 users. And since March of 2020, we've had 513,000 users. So we've brought 500,000 people to our website. It fell back on the strategies we already had in place, but also the innovation that so many of my colleagues have talked about, the NOLA Corona interactive kind of hashtag campaign, our NOLA movie nights where people could fire up a movie, we'd all agree on the movie and the time, and people would get on Twitter and using that hashtag, we could communicate each other while we rewatched a classic New Orleans film like The Big Easy or The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. The virtual backgrounds that you see on Kent's screen and Amanda's screen were collaborations with our photography department. Those saw a ton of downloads. Our Jazz Fest and our restaurant and bar theme, our Summer in New Orleans theme. And then our Bracket Bash program allowed both our curators and staff from across the institution to pitch in on, really interpretive content that was structured as a bracket where music or songs or movies went up against each other. And we allowed our audience to vote on which was their favorite. Again, kind of adding this layer of interaction to the kind of interpretive base that we already had of storytelling. So I kind of point, and Amanda touched on the symposium that we gave in March of this year as the culmination of a lot of what we learned about our digital outreach. We were tasked with giving one of our marquee programs online for the first time, or all online for the first time in its history, and not focusing on one topic per se, but 3 books that were all published kind of on the same topic, that we organized around a title of Recovered Voices, Black Activism in New Orleans from Reconstruction to the Present Day. In advance of the March online or Zoom-based program, we published a series of 7 or 8 first draft stories and many more social media posts to kind of create a base of audience prior to the event itself and to sell the 3 books related to this event. That campaign brought in our largest ever symposium audience in terms of numbers, but also brought in a huge percentage of out-of-state people and people who had never attended an event at the Historic New Orleans Collection and probably never would if we hadn't made it available online. So that goes back to just kind of my original point of transferring this staff knowledge and expertise to the user in the most effective and accessible way. And we've really been able to do that by first sticking to what we did best and, having a good ground and foundation to go off of. Second, adapting to the fact that for a while we couldn't have visitors at all. And for even longer, physical visitation was not the focus of what we were trying to do in communications, and creating new programs and interactive activities for people to interact with us in a new way. And then both of those factors contributing to the new audiences that we brought in, whether through 85% increase in web traffic, which is just a raw number, or the people that we heard personally from after they had experienced the symposium that we put on, and the great comments and feedback from people around the country and in other countries around the world who were able to attend that. I don't know who I'm supposed to toss to. So Becky, are you handling questions and moderation?
Sure, thanks so much, Eli. Well, I'm not necessarily handling moderation, but we are ready to open up for questions. We have about 20 minutes left, so we're happy to answer general questions, or if you would like to direct anything to an specific individual, that's totally fine too.
Please do so in the chat. Well, while we're waiting for questions, I would love to say that the Bracket Bash was my favorite. When I saw that, I just lit up. That was so smart and so fun, being a native New Orleanian. It was fun to see the choices that were made. And, half of my favorites didn't make it, probably because I'm a little more on the esoteric side, but it was really fun to watch. So, all right.
Yeah, it was sad to see good songs get beat out by what does it mean?
What do you mean the cold loses? Okay, Eli, is there a time frame on when your social media posts get a higher response?
That's a good question. Generally, Facebook is our biggest platform in terms of followers. We have around 40,000 followers there, and we generally post midday for our just kind of image and story posts and then around 5 o'clock for links to our first draft blog, so referrals to our website. But I posted things on Sunday afternoon before that do better than something I post at prime time at the end of work on Friday, or at least I thought was prime time. So it really depends on the content. If you've got a good story that's well researched, that's well rounded, that has interesting angles, people are gonna get into it, and they're gonna find it no matter when you post it. But don't post it at 3 in the morning.
Another question from Lainey Chavez to everyone. What platform are you using for crowdsourced digital donations?
I can take that one. We are developing that in-house. Our website runs on Drupal. We have a programmer that is building a system there within Drupal to accept those donations.
Any other questions out there? All right, well, please give our panel a virtual round of applause. Oh, wait, nope. From David Olmos. In general, do you guys believe that you would have had instituted the scheduling and registration requirement for researchers, I'm assuming without the advent of COVID?
No, it's really all, I mean, we do register. We do have a researcher, database. We do register all researchers, but no, it had always been kind of a point of pride for the Historic New Orleans Collection that we did not require appointments or, like I said, letters of introduction or anything like that. And that we were, just always on hand, ready to help whoever walked in. A big reason that we're able to do that is that all of our storage space, almost all of our storage space is adjacent to our reading room. So we don't have to send out for transfers of requested items or anything like that. But no, I don't think we ever would have gone to an appointment system had it not become necessary. And I don't think we'll maintain that when we don't need to any longer.
Yeah, that was the next question. Would you continue?
No.
Okay. All right, anybody else? What practices will you keep from COVID conditions? What are the things that you've learned that you'll maintain when we return to normal?
Staying 6 feet away from people all the time.
We're actually looking at keeping the timed entrances for admissions. We're a free museum, and before we probably had about, I don't know, 80% just walking off the street. We're located in the French Quarter. It's a heavy tourist area, and I think having the timed admissions, because we're getting an 85% return rate for people who do get tickets before they come on site, so which is pretty good because Amanda can attest to this, but signing up for online or even free events before was like a 50% or less return rate. So that's something that I'm interested in maintaining.
I think we're going to maintain, like I said, the virtual meetings for the big groups, and we're also going to work hand in hand with the registration department to keep the kind of schedule of transfers between our permanent collection, because we have 4 campuses that we have to move items through. So we're going to keep a regimented schedule of pickups on Wednesdays for outside, transfers internally on Mondays, and then working around that. But it has made our lives a lot easier because we can not nail down when we're going to be doing that kind of work. And so I imagine that going forward.
This isn't really a practice, but it's something that we kind of redefined during COVID, and that's the redefinition of what our user is. It's not just a person coming in the building or to the reading room. Our audience and our users are online as well, and some of them will never make it here, and we can treat them with the same attention that we do our in-house visitors.
Yeah, and I would say, just to piggyback on what Kent said and what Eli touched upon in his talk, is that for me, it's really opened my eyes to the many different ways that we can bring interpretation and we can bring content to our audience. So not everything has to be a panel discussion or a formal lecture. It can be a bracket bash. It can be a short video. It can be a blog post. Like there's so many more tools at our disposal to engage with our audience.
Okay, if you have any written guidelines or procedures for reference interviews, will you update them after they were affected by COVID?
We don't have any written procedure for reference interviews. It's, how can we help you today? And kind of just branching off from there, depending on where it goes. We in trainings, we practice reference interviews, but we don't have a written procedure.
In regards to donations to your collections, have they increased since the reopenings?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
As Jennifer
Good.
said,
Good.
lots and lots of people had lots and lots of time to go through their closets and attics, and they all called me. And far too many of them now have my cell phone number.
That's good though. That's a good problem to have.
There was a question about Piction up there. Did you see that?
I didn't see it. Oh, is
I see
Piction
it.
the only management software used?
It is the only management software for our digital assets. It maintains and preserves the digitized files. We do also have a collections management system, as well as a customer, I forget what it's called, the ticketing system that tracks our customer relations. So we have several kind of management databases throughout the organization.
All right, any other questions? Okay, well, coming up next is visiting with vendors, so go forth and visit. Please give the Historic New Orleans Collection the round of applause that they deserve. That was really wonderful and informative. Thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your knowledge with us today. All right, thank you.